Good morning, Nolan, Bitcoiner. Another episode of The Breakup, a show where we look at the psychology behind our relationship with money, the US dollar, and contrast it with the burgeoning relationship many Americans, many people in the world have with Bitcoin. We're trying to make a lot of predictions here. The predictions are important because, in my view, predictions really help you understand your worldview at any one time. Because if your prediction is accurate, you can go back and sort of back check why and under what conditions you made that prediction. Bitcoiners, many of whom predicted before COVID that this type of inflationary event would be happening in America and that there was something wrong with the money. Um, so beyond what happened with COVID and the money printing, many Bitcoiners who were attracted to the space in 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014, the whole way up, were predicting a world where we would find ourselves with bad money and policies coming out of the Federal Reserve that wouldn't help people. So a lot of early Bitcoiners wanted to be in Bitcoin precisely for that reason, to lay the foundation of an opt-out of the Federal Reserve, who many Bitcoiners predicted would lead us to inflationary trouble. So you've always got to pay attention to when people get predictions right. And in this case, Bitcoiners probably not bragging as much as they would because it ended up being a pandemic with the dead bodies and whatnot that caused um, the the activity by the Federal Reserve. Had it just been, some Wall Street bros that blew a tire and then, all that stuff happened and they had to print the money again, a little bit like it was in 2008 with the financial crisis, then, you would have had Bitcoiners bragging a little more, I think. But the conditions as they are, 2 years into the pandemic, Bitcoiners definitely starting to make their voices heard, especially when it comes to economic issues. Today's lesson about the breakup, and so when the point of this show really is to contrast Bitcoin and the US dollar, but also not argue one over the other necessarily, right? It's not really about, oh, Bitcoin's better necessarily and then therefore will win. It's more about predicting which system will bring us to a palatable and acceptable future and which one simply will lead us into more of the same troubles we're there. So it's kind of a mega political argument, as in it's beyond choice. The psychology here is not really a rational one, but if you start to, envision the world that each of these systems create. So if you extend the psychology engine behind each of these currencies, you can start to understand a vision of the future that can be created from either one of these engines, right? Think of the money as an engine, right? Don't think of it as math. Think of it as an engine, a psychological engine, but an engine nevertheless that pushes people into the future, right? They can kind of ride it into the future. And that the psychology behind these different forms of money will really have a large role in determining what that world looks like. So today, the concept here, and this is the concept that brought a lot of Bitcoiners to Bitcoin in the very early days. Um, it's called Gresham's law, and this is an old thing, an old law, has nothing to do with Bitcoin. It predates Bitcoin by hundreds of years. I think it's from the 1500s or something in England. A very brief description of what Gresham's law is. Basically, bad money drives out good. The best way to understand Gresham's law is if you have any knowledge of this, is back in the 1960s in the United States, when the coins, or in Canada, the coins, 25 cents in particular, was made out of silver. And then that became debased. And it became, I don't know what's in it, but it's not silver anymore for sure. And what ends up happening is Canadian and American consumers opted to hoard their silver coins and spend their new coins. So many people have these silver coins at their home and they don't spend them, right? They're sort of out of circulation. So the argument is the bad money drives out the good money, but doesn't really drive it out. It's just one that people want to spend and get rid of. So by driving out, we're talking about circulation. It'll force one to be held just like those coins. Versus those that are being used to, buy things. So if you have a choice between two quarters, right? Two quarters, one new made of whatever metal, the other made of silver, right? You're not going to spend the silver one because the face value is 25 cents, right? The face value of the silver coin doesn't really change. You can find a private dealer to buy it for you for a lot more, but that's another argument altogether. So when we take a look and we compare and contrast these two, right, the thing that um, um, makes one propagate into the future and one kind of just gets spent and lose its energy is the quality, right? So the low quality gets flushed out eventually, right? The good quality is held and cherished and treasured, right? Very important. Um, so Gresham's law. Now, we take that idea and we'll extend it into some sort of philosophical or psychological aspects of money. So once again, we're not talking about math, even though we're dealing with numbers, we're talking about psychology. And this is a very just simple definition of money. You hear a lot of definitions of money. I don't care about them. They're really complicated. I often say they're just people looking in the mirror, right? I think the maxim that we all know and recognize is perfectly sufficient to understand money, right? Time is money. Time is money because it's the most valuable limited commodity we have, right? Time is the most valuable commodity we have, and whatever money we have, we're really exchanging for our time in the end, right? In various forms. So time and money have been linked in people's minds for a long time. Like we spend time, we spend money, right? So what do you spend time on, right? What do you spend money on? It's a finite resource, and that's important for the formula have here. The other definition, these two definitions are important. We're going to talk about Gresham's law, right? Bad money drives out good. A quick definition of money, right? Time is money. The next one here is seigniorage. The literal translation of seigniorage is the will of the Lord, kind of, right? And seigneur in French is Lord, the lords in England. The ones who owned armies and in medieval times, right? So they had their ability to mint coins. Now the seigniorage became, because it's their privilege, the idea of seigniorage, right, the Lord's will, has a lot to do with the profit that the people printing the money can make, right? And seigniorage is just that. It's the profit from creating the money supply, right? So it's the spread between the commodity value and the face value, right? So if it costs, say, a silver 25-cent coin, the reason why they stopped it in the first place, right? The Gresham's law piece, they stopped the 25-cent coins made of silver because the cost of the silver in the coin was greater than the cost of the coin. It was more than 25 cents, right? Or the face value of the coin, right? So the spread between the commodity value, so let's just have even numbers. Imagine it was $1's worth of silver all of a sudden in a 25-cent coin, right? So the cost of the 25-cent coin is then $1, but the face value is 25 cents, right? So that's not going to work, right? That won't work. So, but if it's the other way around, say the amount of silver in the coin was just a penny, right? A penny's worth of silver, 1 cent, 1/25th, right? So when you put the coin out, it's worth 24 cents, 25 cents, minus the 1 cent of production, so it's 24 cents, right? You've made 24 cents in creating the money. That's your seigniorage rate, right? That's how much you make. But that only works when you've got money made of precious metals. Or in the case of bills, there's a certain cost to the anti-counterfeit nature of the bills and stuff like that. But it's not that great. Even those little dots you often find at the end of a coin, those came from anti-counterfeiting as well, because people, when they were valuable metal, would cut them off, right? They would cut them off. If you look at the old Spanish dollars in China, they had chops in them, right? Chinese characters cut into them to make sure the purity was there. So there was all these tests on the metal, and people would slice them and cut them. And if you saw the edges of a coin cut, you knew someone had tampered with it. So seigniorage in that world, I mentioned that the coins, the 25-cent coins, really just to give you a sense of the basics of it. When we get into our world of not precious metal coins, right, the bills, fiat, US dollar, Canadian dollar, euro, seigniorage is no longer about the spread of the cost of the commodity and the face value, because there is no cost of the commodity, as I just mentioned, right? It's a little bit of R&D to get a good, polymer bill or whatever, but it's nothing, right? When you actually get it out and you scale the production of those, one bill costs, whatever it costs to develop $1 million, but the $1 million is spent for every bill created in that issuance, right? So it's spread out. So the cost can be very, very small. So what happens in fiat is that it's actually not, the seigniorage fee is no longer the cost of the coins, and this is the most important thing to remember. It's actually the inflation percentage times the population of that country. So in the United States, it's the taxable population. Say the taxable population is 100 million in the United States plus the inflation rate, right? That becomes the spread, becomes the value of the money they've printed versus the inflation rate times how many people are in that base. So what you end up having is a situation where seigniorage can be really, really profitable, right? And if there's inflation, they just have to print more and then sort of fight it that way, right? But the seigniorage is there. Now, remember, time is money, right? And the costs of creating the money, right? So time is money, and then you've got the costs of creating the money. What that ends up looking like, right, is this. So Gresham's law. Time is money, that's part of the definition, but also the cost of the money is a part of that, right? So the money itself, right? What's the money? And then the cost of producing the money. So it's time, and then in my equations here, it's time plus, right? So these are the definitions: seigniorage, the cost of creating the money, and definition of what money is, time, right? So it's time plus this. So in dollars, it's money, right? Money, time is money. So money equals time plus the cost of, in this case of seigniorage, it's not just the bills, right? It's the institutions that enforce the money, right? In lieu of precious metals, we took fiat institutions that coordinate together and give money value. It's not a perfect combination, but it's mostly that. It's the cost of the banks, the Navy, the Army, the armed forces, government, courts, law enforcement, police, everything, right? All of these institutions work together to give us something that approximates money, right? And then if you add the cost of energy into that equation, right? Oil, right? Oil, you start to get the formula by which fiat currencies are measured by economists, right? So they'll have a look at an economy's energy base, the amount of homes being bought. So seigniorage then, in a debt creation world, right, is issuing loans, right, and having these institutions there that can make sure that money is recognized and useful and everyone agrees it's got value. And then the cost of the energy is a piece that you're able to use to measure one fiat against the other. So the amount of energy being produced by the United States, the sort of basket that goes into that, is then measured against Canada, and then you start to see the relative rates go up and down. But nevertheless, the cost of energy is a part of it, and the costs of banks and the institutions required to get that money to be real, right? Now, to contrast that with Bitcoin, Bitcoin is really just money times money, equals time, just like money. It's always the same time. And then here, there is no real cost of banks or any of these other institutions that have to recognize the debt issuance, right? There's no debt issuance to create more money. In the US dollar system, it is debt issuance. That's how you create more money, right? So in seigniorage, it's not about creating more money with the metals that go into it. You create more, and then policies have to kind of balance that, right? So you've got the costs of all the institutions here. In the case of Bitcoin, those institutions don't matter. They're not a part of the equation at all, right? At all. There is still costs to creating the money, right? And that's the cost of energy, right? So, Bitcoiners have to pay electrical bills in order to mint money, right? They don't mint money by giving out loans. They pay electrical bills, right? They burn electricity and are able to mint new money, right? That's how you participate. You secure the network, you burn electricity, and you get an opportunity to mint the new Bitcoins. And they're all sort of mathematically and algorithmically enforced. So the supply is known, right, to everyone participating in this. Now, in the end, when you contrast these two pieces here, you get, all of this stuff. And I'm not a person who believes we need no government at all. But the cost of government is born in the money, in the way we practice government today. So governments will create more money, go into debt, increase the money supply, and then balance it with policies, right? Now, this piece here, the cost of energy, is looked at like a consumer issue. But if you're the creator of the money, right, if you're the money issuer, you're not so concerned like a Bitcoiner about the cost of energy, right? The cost of energy is not really so important. the cost of energy that most accurately combines with this element here, in particular, Navy and Army, they're huge requirements and needs for energy, right? Particularly combustion energy. Um, that piece here creates just a totally different aspect that you don't have to deal with in Bitcoin. It's not so much that any one party is evil or good or inherently anything, right? It's that there's so many of them, right? It's added complexity to the system, right? It's added complexity to the system. So my goal here is not to say these institutions will not proliferate better energy. It's that it's the psychology of it is already somewhat established, dynamic, changing all the time, but the tit for tats, the nature of it working, harmonizing, orchestrating together has been around for a long time. Now we're at an era, especially when it comes to global warming, where we understand that the energy needs of our planet have to change, right? So it can't just be combustion energy. I think both sides know that, right? All policymakers dealing in fiat are pretty aware that the cost of energy, in this case oil, is not going to help us propel forward as a society, right? There's a limit to it. And um, when you look at the limit to it, right, we need renewable energy, we need water, hydro, wind, solar, all these things you hear very often, right? Now, yesterday in the LA Times, the editorial board, not a writer, not an opinion piece, the editorial board of the newspaper suggested that the largest nuclear power plant in California should not be it should not have its life extended. It should be put out of business. Should be shut down and replaced with renewable energy, right? And of course, they got just smashed on Twitter and other social media for saying this because a lot of the American people are turning their mind on, everyone right now turning their mind on to nuclear energy, right? You've got France embracing it. You've got Macron saying, I'm going to build so many nuclear reactors. I'm going to spread them around the world. You've got Rolls-Royce in England saying they're going to send portable nuclear reactors to people. There's a lot of this going on. So where is the development for nuclear going to come from, right? Is it going to be a state? Well, the states have all of these considerations, right? They have all of these considerations already. That goes into the money, but these considerations are really important, right? Are they going to go away? Probably not, right? Probably not. And if you look at what's going on in California, the decision-making system to get nuclear built is not quite as quick as maybe we need, right? It's going pretty well in China. It's going pretty well in France, in England. America getting better, money being put in, things happening, right? But nevertheless, the political side has so many interests that we don't understand, right? It's not so transparent. The incentives of all these parties can't really be quantified. The psychology of it isn't clear, let's say, right? Because what people want, and all these different people, what they want, might be at cross purposes, right? They might be in conflict. And so you should expect from the system that we have more conflict, right? I can't imagine that the political system we have is going to just roll out the red carpet for nuclear proliferation in America, right? There's a lot of problems with that. Now, I'm not saying no nuclear power plants are going to get built. I believe many will get built, right? But they'll get built after these processes are worked out, right? Because these are state actors and et cetera, et cetera. But here's the contrast. And here's why, we can argue that a breakup is necessary with the world we know and an embracing of Bitcoin because we'll get this a lot faster. And I'll explain why. We'll get it faster because basically this equation here eliminates this decision-making piece, right? It's just, in the case of Bitcoin, money equals time plus the cost of energy. Right now, Bitcoiners don't own any energy supply outright, right? There's pieces of energy that they kind of slip into and get for cheap, right? Texas wind at night. They used to get the monsoon rains at the Three Gorges Dam in China. As someone who lives in Quebec, I know we use our abundant hydroelectricity here in Quebec in order to mine Bitcoin. So there's a whole world of Bitcoiners harnessing this energy because it's the only piece of seigniorage that is somewhat variable and can be controlled and can be competed on, right? So a bit of the machine costs the machines a little bit, but much less. So the cost of energy is a huge part of Bitcoin seigniorage. Now, because it's a huge part of Bitcoin seigniorage, the prediction is this: Bitcoiners are going to be the first to buy nuclear power. They're going to do things that we only saw states doing, right? State actors building, proliferating nuclear energy used to only really be a thing that we thought states capable of, right? We didn't think independent private businesses could go out and start doing this. Well, in the case of Bitcoin, we can. You say, oh, what about the regulators? The beautiful thing is, Bitcoiners do not need to build nuclear power plants near any human population centers. They can go to where there are no countries. There are a few parts of the world with no countries, right? Western Sahara, near Mauritania, south of Morocco, all that area there is unclaimed, right? Legitimately unclaimed. No one would stop you. A private army with a Bitcoin rig and, and a nuclear reactor could set up shop there and face very little opposition, right? Very little opposition. And they wouldn't have to worry about governments. They wouldn't have to worry about people telling them, oh, it's a risk, et cetera, et cetera. You could do it on your own. You could do it in the Arctic, right? You can do it in Siberia. You could do it in the North Pole. South Pole, I don't know, but you could. You can go anywhere where there are no people. You can go to the top of a mountain, right? There's all kinds of places where you can put these things down. Now, there are requirements, of course, water. I don't know all the requirements of engineering a Gen 3 or a Gen 4 nuclear reactor. And we're not talking about the nuclear reactors that can have the chain reaction meltdowns and don't know what to do with their waste products. The Gen 3 and Gen 4 have most of this stuff solved, right? Really important to distinguish. So the prediction here, and the reason why we should break up with the US dollar system, is because they're not going to deliver nuclear and solve global warming faster than Bitcoin. Bitcoin is going to get there faster. It's going to get there with results that will come to individual people much quicker because they get to bypass this rough decision-making process that we don't really understand the incentives and probably never could. That's all I got for today, everyone.